My beloved child, something about this meeting was unusual from the very first moment, and your soulmate could feel it before a single explanation was given. The message arrived quietly, without drama, without a long introduction, just a simple request from someone they had never expected to hear from. A wealthy stranger wanted a private conversation, and somehow, impossibly, the reason involved you. At first your soulmate stared at the words longer than they meant to. The name was unfamiliar, yet there was something unmistakably deliberate about the invitation. It did not feel random. It did not feel like someone trying to impress them. It felt as though a piece of a story had been moving silently toward them for a long time, and now it had finally reached the door. Your soulmate almost dismissed it. They even placed the phone face down and tried to continue with their day, telling themselves there had to be some ordinary explanation. But curiosity has a strange way of returning when a question touches someone you deeply care about, and every few minutes their eyes drifted back toward that phone. Why would a stranger with every reason to remain busy ask specifically for them? Why would this person insist the conversation happen privately? And most of all, why was your name the one detail mentioned before anything else? Don't skip. Because what unsettled your soulmate was not the stranger's status, their influence, or the place they suggested meeting. It was the careful wording of one sentence: "There is something about this person you deserve to understand." Your soulmate read it again. Then once more. No accusation followed. No warning. Nothing harsh. Just that quiet sentence hanging there, carrying a weight they could not explain. And somewhere beneath their uncertainty, another emotion began rising: protectiveness. They did not know what this stranger intended to say about you, but they already knew they would listen carefully. Hours later, when the meeting finally happened, your soulmate walked into a quiet room expecting confidence, perhaps even arrogance, from the person waiting for them. Instead, the stranger stood almost immediately and greeted them with a surprising gentleness. They were composed, clearly accustomed to being heard, yet there was none of the performance your soulmate had expected. No entourage. No unnecessary display. Just 2 chairs, a small table, 2 untouched glasses of water, and a thin folder resting between them. That folder became impossible not to notice. Your name was not written on it. There was no photograph visible. Yet every instinct in your soulmate said whatever had brought them here was inside. Then the stranger said something that completely changed the atmosphere. "You probably think this meeting is about what I have," they said quietly. "It isn't. It's about what they have." Your soulmate frowned. "They?" The stranger gave a small nod. "The person you care about. You." And suddenly the room felt different. Not heavier, clearer. As though the conversation had finally stepped onto the path it was always meant to follow. Your soulmate leaned forward, but the stranger did not open the folder. Not yet. Instead, they asked a question. "How much do you really know about the way this person treats people when nobody important is watching?" Your soulmate was caught off guard. Of all the things they had imagined hearing, this was nowhere near the list. They thought about you in ordinary moments, the way you speak when you are comfortable, the things you notice that others overlook, the emotions you sometimes hide behind a calm face. They thought about your strengths, but also the moments when they had wondered whether they understood you completely. Perhaps you have felt that distance too, my beloved child. That quiet ache of being known in pieces but not always in full. People notice what you say. They notice how you look when you enter a room. They notice your choices when those choices affect them. But the smallest parts of your character often happen where no applause exists. Those moments rarely become stories. And that was exactly what this stranger had come to speak about. I met them without really meeting them, the stranger continued. Your soulmate looked confused. The stranger almost smiled. That will make sense soon. Then, instead of explaining, they described an ordinary day from some time ago. Nothing cinematic. Nothing grand. A crowded place. People moving quickly. Everyone distracted by their own responsibilities. The stranger had been there for reasons unrelated to you, keeping a low profile, observing more than participating. Somewhere nearby, a person was struggling with a small but frustrating situation. Not a crisis. Not anything dramatic. Just one of those human moments in which someone needs patience more than they need a solution. Several people passed. Some were too busy to notice. Others noticed and kept moving. Then you appeared. Your soulmate's expression changed immediately. The stranger saw it. You know what I'm going to say? They asked. Your soulmate shook their head. No. But somehow I think I know the kind of thing you mean. The stranger finally leaned back. They explained that you had stopped. You did not know anyone important was nearby. You were not trying to build a reputation. There was no reason to perform. You simply noticed what others had overlooked, offered a few quiet words, helped in the modest way available to you, and continued on as though nothing remarkable had happened. That was all. Yet something about that small scene stayed with this stranger long after you had forgotten it. Stay till the end. Because your soulmate initially thought that must be the entire reason for the meeting. A wealthy person had witnessed a kind act, remembered you, and decided to share the story. Meaningful, yes. Unexpected, certainly. But hardly enough to explain the secrecy, the folder, or the strange urgency behind the invitation. Your soulmate thanked them, but their eyes moved toward the table again. The stranger noticed. That isn't why I called you here, they said. And there it was. The first real turn in the conversation. Your soulmate became completely still. The stranger placed one hand over the folder but did not open it. That moment made me curious, they continued. Not because kindness is rare, but because authentic kindness has a particular quality. It doesn't check who is watching. That sentence landed somewhere deep inside your soulmate. Perhaps because they remembered times when they had misunderstood your quietness. Perhaps because they had once mistaken your boundaries for distance, your thoughtfulness for hesitation, or your silence for a lack of feeling. The stranger seemed almost to sense that something was shifting. So I asked a few questions, they continued. Nothing invasive. Nothing inappropriate. They simply spoke to people who had crossed paths with you naturally. And the same pattern kept appearing. Not perfection. The stranger was careful to say that. They were not creating a fantasy version of you. They heard that you had difficult days, moments of doubt, moments when you withdrew to think, moments when you did not always know the perfect thing to say. But underneath those ordinary imperfections, something kept repeating: when you cared sincerely. When you gave your word, you tried to honor it. When someone trusted you with something vulnerable, you did not treat it casually. And when life disappointed you, you did not always allow that disappointment to turn you cold. Your soulmate lowered their eyes for a moment, because suddenly the conversation was touching memories they had not expected to revisit. Maybe they remembered a message from you that seemed simple at the time but now sounded different in their mind. Maybe they remembered the day you stayed patient when walking away would have been easier. Maybe they remembered a tiny kindness they had received from you and somehow never fully thanked you for. Something important is waiting for you, because the stranger was not merely describing qualities your soulmate already admired. They were revealing a pattern your soulmate had never been able to see from inside the relationship. There is a difference between loving someone and understanding the effect they have on the world around them. Your soulmate knew how you affected their heart. They did not know how quietly you had left traces of yourself in places you no longer thought about. The stranger began recounting another encounter. Someone remembered you because you had listened when everyone else was trying to give advice. Another remembered that you had spoken respectfully about someone who was not in the room. Another recalled that you once gave credit away rather than reaching for it yourself. Tiny details. Almost embarrassingly ordinary. Yet together they created a picture your soulmate could no longer ignore. "Why are you telling me this?" they finally asked. The stranger became silent. Not dramatically. Thoughtfully. Their eyes moved to the folder again. "Because I know what it feels like to recognize someone's value after circumstances have already made things complicated," they said. "And I learned that sometimes the people closest to a person are the last ones who get to see the full picture." Your soulmate's breath slowed. That sentence did not sound theoretical. It sounded lived. The stranger continued, revealing a little about themselves, not their wealth, not their achievements, but an old regret. Years earlier, they had underestimated someone because that person was quiet. They assumed confidence would look louder. They assumed value would announce itself. Only later did they realize the person they had overlooked possessed the one quality no status could manufacture. Consistency when no reward was guaranteed. "I promised myself," the stranger said, "that if I ever saw that kind of person again, I wouldn't keep the observation to myself when it mattered." Your soulmate looked at them for several seconds. And then, almost instinctively, they asked the question that had been waiting beneath every other question. "Why does it matter now?" The stranger's fingers paused against the edge of the folder. There was the smallest hesitation. Your soulmate saw it and understood immediately that they were approaching the real reason. Everything before this had been preparation. Not manipulation. Preparation. The stranger wanted them to understand your character before understanding what had happened because of it. "Because something reached me recently," the stranger said. Something connected to them. Your soulmate's eyes widened. Connected how? No answer came immediately. Instead, the stranger opened the folder at last. Inside were only a few pages and one small object tucked beneath them. Your soulmate could not see it clearly from where they were sitting. But when the stranger removed the first page, your soulmate recognized something. A date. One they remembered. A day involving you that had seemed completely ordinary at the time. Their posture changed. "What is that?" they asked. The stranger turned the page around but kept part of it covered with their hand. "This is where the story changes," they said softly. Your soulmate looked from the paper to the stranger, then back again. There was no fear in the room. No accusation. Only the extraordinary feeling of discovering that a moment you thought had passed unnoticed had continued moving through other lives. "And my beloved child, perhaps this is the part meant to touch something inside you too. Not every meaningful thing you do will give you immediate proof that it mattered. Sometimes the kindness you forget becomes the memory someone else carries. Sometimes the patience you thought went unseen becomes the reason another person speaks well of you later. Sometimes your most powerful influence happens when you are simply being yourself and expecting nothing in return." Your soulmate was beginning to understand this, yet they still had no idea why that particular date mattered. The stranger finally uncovered the page. Your soulmate read several lines in silence. Their expression softened first, then changed completely. They read it again as though their mind needed another moment to accept the connection. "They did this?" your soulmate whispered. The stranger nodded. "They probably don't even know what came from it." Your soulmate looked almost stunned, not because the action itself was enormous, but because its consequences had traveled far beyond the moment. Apparently, on that date, something you had said or done had quietly encouraged another person to make a better choice in their own life. That person later spoke about the experience. Their story traveled through a small circle of people until, eventually, it reached someone connected to this stranger. No viral moment. No public recognition. Just human influence moving from one person to another. Your soulmate sat back, suddenly seeing you through an entirely new lens. And perhaps this was the first thing that truly changed everything. They realized there were parts of your story that could not be measured by what you had achieved, what you owned, or how loudly anyone praised you. Your presence had mattered in places even you had stopped remembering. Yet the stranger was not finished. In fact, when your soulmate thought they finally understood the purpose of the meeting, the stranger reached beneath those pages and removed the small object that had been hidden at the bottom of the folder. The moment your soulmate saw it, their face changed again. This time there was recognition. Immediate recognition. "Where did you get that?" they asked. The stranger did not answer straight away. They placed it gently on the table between them and said, "This is the part one wasn't sure I should tell you today." Your soulmate leaned closer. Something about that object connected directly to a chapter involving you, something they believed only a handful of people could possibly know. The stranger looked at them with the same calm expression they had carried from the beginning. "Everything I've told you so far explains why I respect this person," they said. "But it doesn't explain why I asked specifically to meet you." A quiet pause followed. Then came the sentence your soulmate would replay long after leaving that room. "I asked to meet you because there is something they never told you about what happened afterward." And as your soulmate stared at the object resting between them, one truth became impossible to ignore: the most important revelation of this meeting had not yet been spoken. For several seconds, your soulmate did not touch the object on the table, because recognition had arrived before understanding, and sometimes that is the most unsettling kind of curiosity, the moment when your heart knows something your mind has not yet arranged into words. They had seen it before. Not recently. Not clearly enough to remember every detail. But somewhere inside an ordinary moment involving you, that small object had once appeared, and your soulmate suddenly realized it had carried a history they had never been told. They looked at the stranger, expecting an explanation, but the stranger remained quiet, almost as if they understood that some discoveries need a few seconds of silence before another sentence can enter the room. "You remember it," the stranger finally said. Your soulmate nodded slowly. "I think I do." The stranger moved the object slightly closer, not forcing them to pick it up. "Then you probably remember what happened before it disappeared." That question changed everything again, because your soulmate remembered more than they expected. A small conversation. A moment when you had been distracted. Something you had brushed aside with a simple explanation, perhaps saying it was nothing important, perhaps changing the subject because you did not want attention placed on you. At the time, your soulmate had accepted your answer. Why wouldn't they? Not every detail needs to become an investigation. Relationships are built partly on the grace of allowing another person to keep ordinary pieces of their life private. But now, sitting across from someone who had somehow brought that forgotten object back into the story, your soulmate understood there had been more behind that day than you ever explained. "What happened afterward?" they asked. The wealthy stranger folded their hands and looked toward the window for a moment. "Something very simple," they replied. "And something that became much larger than anyone expected." Don't skip, because the next thing your soulmate learned was not about money, status, or some impossible secret hidden from the world. It was about a decision you made quietly when nobody around you realized how much it would matter. The stranger explained that long ago, around the time connected to that object, you had crossed paths with someone who was uncertain about themselves. That person was not looking for rescue. They were simply having one of those seasons when life feels strangely unclear, when every direction seems possible and yet none feels completely right. You had spoken with them only briefly. Perhaps you barely remember the conversation now. Maybe you thought you were only offering perspective. Maybe you were simply trying to make another human being feel less alone in a confusing moment. But you had said something that stayed with them. Not some perfect phrase. Not a dramatic promise. Just something honest. You had reminded them that they did not need to become someone else in order for their life to have meaning. Your soulmate listened carefully. The stranger continued. That person later made a choice because of the confidence your words restored. They chose patience instead of giving up on something meaningful. They chose to repair a relationship they had nearly abandoned. They chose to take a small opportunity they had almost dismissed. And over time, that decision connected them with people who would eventually become important in the stranger's own life. Your soulmate blinked, beginning to understand the chain. You had touched one life. That life had touched another. And years later, without you knowing, the influence had reached someone sitting on the other side of this private meeting. The stranger gave a faint smile. You see why I said they probably don't know what came from it? Your soulmate nodded, but something still did not fit. They respected the story. They were moved by it. Yet the meeting still felt too intentional for gratitude alone. You could have told them this yourself, your soulmate said. Why bring me here? The stranger looked down at the object between them. Because they would have made it smaller. That answer arrived so quickly that your soulmate became quiet. Smaller? Yes, the stranger said. People like them often do that with the things they give. They remember what they received, but they minimize what they offered. They remember every time they could have done better, but forget how often they showed up when it mattered. Your soulmate's eyes softened, because they knew exactly what the stranger meant. Perhaps they had watched you dismiss a compliment with a joke. Perhaps they had seen you question whether you had done enough even after giving what you could. Perhaps they had wondered why someone as emotionally aware as you could sometimes be so unaware of your own impact. And suddenly a private meeting with a stranger was showing them something they had been standing beside for a long time without completely recognizing. You did not always understand the effect you had on others because you were too busy measuring yourself against an invisible standard no one else was asking you to meet. Something important is waiting for you, because your soulmate did not merely learn a story about your past. They began remembering your present differently. Tiny moments started rearranging themselves inside their mind. The message you rewrote 3 times because you wanted to say something gently. The time you remembered a detail someone mentioned weeks earlier. The way you occasionally went quiet not because you stopped caring, but because you cared enough to choose your words carefully. Things they had once interpreted as hesitation suddenly looked like depth. The stranger saw this change in their expression. You're remembering things, they said. Your soulmate almost laughed softly. A lot of things. And then came an unexpected question. Have you ever wondered why they sometimes pull away right when something matters most? Your soulmate looked up immediately. That question was dangerously precise, not dangerous in a threatening way, but precise enough to touch a place they had kept private. Yes. They had wondered. Perhaps more than once. There had been moments when the connection between you felt warm, open, almost effortless, and then suddenly you became quieter. Not cold. Not cruel. Just careful. Your soulmate had sometimes interpreted that caution as uncertainty about them. Maybe they had even wondered whether your feelings were changing. The stranger shook their head gently. From what I have learned, I don't think that is what it means. Your soulmate's attention sharpened. Then what does it mean? The stranger paused, choosing their words. I think this person learned very early that anything precious deserves protection. And sometimes they protect things by stepping back long enough to understand what they are feeling. The room became almost painfully quiet, because your soulmate could remember occasions when exactly that had happened. You had disappeared inward, then returned with greater clarity. You had taken time, then spoken more sincerely. What had once looked like emotional distance began to resemble responsibility. Not perfection. Not always the best communication. But a genuine attempt not to say things carelessly when your heart was involved. Your soulmate lowered their gaze. I thought, they stopped. The stranger waited. I thought sometimes they didn't care enough. The stranger did not correct them harshly. They simply said, maybe they cared enough to be afraid of handling something important carelessly. That realization struck differently. It did not erase every misunderstanding. It did not turn every complicated moment into something romantic. But it opened a new possibility, and sometimes one new possibility is enough to soften years of interpretation. Your soulmate sat with it, realizing how often relationships are shaped not only by what happened, but by the meanings people attach to what happened. Silence can mean rejection, or reflection. Distance can mean disinterest, or an attempt to regain balance. Hesitation can mean doubt, or the recognition that something matters enough not to rush. The stranger was not asking your soulmate to idealize you. In fact, they were careful not to. They are human, the stranger said. They have probably misunderstood you too. Your soulmate smiled faintly. Definitely. Then perhaps this is not about deciding who was right. Perhaps it is about seeing each other with more accurate eyes. That sentence settled over the room gently. And for the first time since arriving, your soulmate stopped feeling as though they were being given information and started feeling as though they were being offered perspective. The wealthy stranger had not invited them there to expose some hidden scandal. They had invited them because they had witnessed the ripple of a life your soulmate was emotionally close to, and they believed that closeness deserved a clearer picture. Yet even now, the mystery was not finished. Your soulmate glanced at the object again. You still haven't told me why you have this. The stranger nodded. You're right. They reached for it and turned it over. There was a small mark on the back. Your soulmate leaned closer. A few letters. A date. Perhaps even a short handwritten line. The moment they saw it, another memory surfaced. This object had once belonged to someone you cared about deeply. Not necessarily romantically. Someone whose opinion had mattered to you. Someone who had known you during a chapter when you were still becoming the person you are now. Your soulmate remembered you mentioning them only once or twice. Never in great detail. This came from them? Your soulmate asked. Eventually, the stranger said. Yes. Then the stranger told the story slowly. Years earlier, the object had been passed along with a note, not to create drama, not to expose you, but because someone believed its meaning should not disappear. The note described a moment involving you that few people knew about. A time when you had been offered recognition for something you had done, and instead of accepting all the credit, you redirected attention toward another person who had helped. It was such a small decision that you probably never imagined anyone would remember it. But the person who received that recognition never forgot. They kept this object as a reminder of the day someone could have stepped forward and said, "This was me," but instead said, "They mattered too." Your soulmate's expression changed. You had never told them that. Not once. Perhaps because you did not think it was worth mentioning. Perhaps because telling the story would have defeated the purpose. And that realization was exactly what the stranger wanted them to understand. Your best moments were often the ones you did not turn into evidence of your goodness. Stay till the end, because this was where your soulmate finally asked the question the stranger had been waiting for. Did you ask around about them because of that one story? No, the stranger replied. I asked around because I was considering whether I should involve myself in something connected to them. Your soulmate straightened. There it was. Another layer. A practical reason beneath the emotional one. The stranger had not simply become fascinated with your character. They had encountered your name in connection with something that required a judgment about trust. Your soulmate did not know what that something was, and the stranger was careful not to present it as some grand promise or guaranteed opportunity. They only explained that a project, community effort, creative idea, or meaningful initiative had somehow placed your name near their path. Not because you had requested special treatment. Not because you had tried to impress anyone. Your name had surfaced through recommendation. Someone had said, if you want a person who will take this seriously, speak to them. That recommendation had made the stranger curious. The old story had made them more curious. Then the pattern of what others remembered about you had made them stop and pay attention. Your soulmate listened in silence, almost stunned by the idea that while you had been living your ordinary life, people had been quietly forming an impression of you through small experiences you were not tracking. The stranger leaned forward. I have met many impressive people, they said. That isn't difficult. Impressive can be rehearsed. What interested me was that the same description kept appearing when no one knew what anyone else had said. Your soulmate asked, what description? The stranger smiled slightly. That they make people feel considered. Something about that sentence broke through all the suspense and reached your soulmate in the simplest possible way. They knew it was true. They had felt it themselves. Even during complicated moments. Even when you and they had misunderstood each other. There were times you had remembered the smallest things about them. Times you had adjusted your words because you knew what might hurt unnecessarily. Times you had tried, imperfectly perhaps, to understand rather than merely react. And they suddenly realized how easy it is to become so familiar with someone's care that you stop noticing how rare it feels. The stranger continued, the reason I wanted to meet you first is because you are part of the picture I couldn't understand from the outside. Your soulmate's brow furrowed. How? Whenever anyone spoke about them, the stranger said, there was one subject that changed their tone. Your soulmate became completely still. Me? The stranger nodded. Not dramatically. Just once. You. Now the room felt smaller. The folder, the object, the stories. All of them seemed to fade slightly as that single answer settled between them. Your soulmate had arrived expecting to hear what a stranger knew about you. Instead, they were beginning to learn what other people had noticed about the way you spoke about them. The stranger explained that nobody had revealed private details. Nothing inappropriate had been shared. But when your name came up naturally, people noticed something subtle. You became more careful. More protective. You did not use your soulmate as material for conversation. You did not reduce your connection to gossip, performance, or complaint. Even when things were uncertain, you spoke with respect. And to the stranger, that mattered. Do you understand? They asked. Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Their eyes had become glassy with emotion, not from sadness, but from the disorienting feeling of realizing you had protected something they thought you might have abandoned. There may have been distance between you. There may have been confusion. There may even have been moments when each of you wondered what the other truly felt. But apparently, in spaces where your soulmate was absent and you could have said anything, you had chosen restraint. You had preserved their dignity even when there was no reward for doing so. That was the revelation that finally changed the emotional center of the meeting. Your soulmate had been measuring your feelings mostly by the moments they could see. The stranger was showing them the moments they could not. "They never told me that," your soulmate whispered. "Of course not," the stranger replied. "That would be a strange thing to announce." Your soulmate actually laughed then, a small, emotional laugh that released some of the tension from the room. And for the first time that day, the wealthy stranger laughed too. The atmosphere softened. This was no longer a mysterious interrogation. It had become something unexpectedly human, one person helping another understand what their closeness sometimes prevented them from seeing clearly. But the stranger had one final question. When was the last time you spoke honestly with them without trying to predict the outcome? Your soulmate's smile disappeared, replaced by thoughtfulness. The answer was not simple. Perhaps too much time had been spent trying to read signs, protect feelings, avoid awkwardness, or prevent another misunderstanding. Perhaps both of you had become so careful that sincerity had started moving in circles around the very conversation it needed to enter. Your soulmate looked at the phone beside them. For the first time since the meeting began, they seemed tempted to reach for it. The stranger noticed but did not encourage them to act impulsively. "You don't have to do anything because of what I said," they told them. "That isn't why you are here." Your soulmate looked up. "Then why am I here?" The stranger gave the most grounded answer of the entire meeting. "So whatever you decide next is based on a fuller truth, not an incomplete assumption." And there it was. No pressure. No grand prediction. No command about what should happen between you. Just clarity. The wealthy stranger had not come to decide your relationship. They had come to return a missing piece of context. Your soulmate sat quietly, realizing how different life can look when one assumption changes. Maybe you had not been indifferent. Maybe your silence had carried more care than they understood. Maybe their own caution had looked like rejection from your side too. Maybe neither of you needed some perfect cosmic sign. Maybe what had been missing was simply a more honest understanding of what had already been there. And yet, my beloved child, something still remained hidden. Because just as your soulmate thought the meeting had reached its natural conclusion, the stranger gathered the pages back into the folder but left one envelope on the table. Your soulmate had not noticed it earlier. It had been underneath everything else. Unlike the other items, this envelope had their name written on the front. Not your name. Theirs. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "What is that?" they asked. The stranger's expression changed, not darker, not alarming, only more serious. "That is the reason I almost cancelled this meeting." Your soulmate stared at the envelope. "Who wrote it?" The stranger looked toward the door, then back at them. "Someone who knew you both at a time when neither of you understood what was actually happening." Your soulmate's hand moved toward it, then stopped. The stranger did not push it closer. "You can read it," they said. "But I need you to understand something first. What's inside does not erase anything you lived through. It only explains one moment that both of you interpreted differently." That sentence alone made your soulmate's heart beat faster, because there was one moment between you they had replayed again and again, the day something changed, the conversation that ended too soon, the message that seemed colder than expected, the choice that created distance neither of you fully explained. Could this envelope somehow be connected to that? Your soulmate looked at the handwriting again. Then, slowly, they opened it. Inside was a single folded page. They read the first line. Stopped. Read it again. And then looked at the stranger with an expression completely different from anything they had shown all evening. "They never knew?" your soulmate asked quietly. The stranger shook their head. "No," your soulmate lowered their eyes to the letter once more. Whatever was written there had just revealed something neither of you had known, something about the exact moment your connection changed direction. And as their fingers tightened gently around that page, one realization became impossible to avoid: the wealthy stranger had revealed far more about you than your soulmate expected, but the final truth was not really about who you were. It was about what happened between you when both of you thought the other person already understood.